Measure the color temperature of the light striking the card and adjust the white balance to match it perfectly. If the camera was able to get a good white balance, good will be displayed on the control panel. And now you're ready to start shooting with a white balance that's perfectly matched to the current lighting situation. Now, how long did that take? 15 seconds? That's a lot easier than trying to fix your pictures later on the computer. The D90 simplifies flash photography by coming equipped with a built-in pop-up flash. Now, in some of the point-and-shoot modes, the flash will pop up automatically whenever the camera senses that it's needed. But in other modes, the camera will never pop up the flash, and you can't make it pop up either. That's another reason I recommend not using the point-and-shoot modes. On the other hand, when you're using any of the advanced shooting modes, you can manually pop the flash up whenever you decide that you want to use it. The decision is completely up to you, and the camera will never pop the flash up on its own in these modes. Now, I wish that I could say that flash photography was just as simple as popping up the flash and shooting away, but it's not. You also need to choose a flash mode. The flash mode is what determines how the flash is fired when you take a picture. If you hold down the flash button and rotate the main command dial, you can cycle through the 5 choices. But not all choices are going to be available in all the exposure modes. Right now, my camera is set for aperture priority. This icon means fill flash, and it's what I consider the normal mode for the majority of situations where I feel a flash is needed. If you're not sure which flash mode to choose, use this one. The next flash mode simply adds red eye reduction to the fill flash mode. Next, there's the slow sync mode, which attempts to achieve a mix of ambient light and the much brighter light generated from the flash. On the left is an image taken with fill flash. The subject looks fine, but you have no sense of the surroundings because the flash has overpowered the ambient light. On the right, we see what happens with slow sync. The camera was able to capture the subject along with the surroundings for a more natural look. The next mode simply adds red eye reduction to slow sync. And the final mode is called rear curtain sync. You might also see the word slow displayed with it, depending on the shooting mode you've selected. In this mode, the flash fires just before the shutter closes instead of when it first opens. When combined with a slow shutter speed, you'll create a streak behind a moving subject, with the subject frozen at the end of the frame, providing a great sense of motion. If you would like to know more about using flash with your D90, I recommend getting a copy of the Magic Lantern Prism Guide's Nikon AF Speedlight Flash System. It offers comprehensive information on using Nikon's creative lighting system. As we saw earlier, Live View enables you to display a real-time video image on the monitor instead of using the regular optical viewfinder to compose your shots. Now, I'll admit that Live View can sometimes seem more convenient when the camera is mounted on a tripod, but I don't recommend it for routine handheld shooting because it simply makes the camera too awkward to aim and hold steady. You know, the D90 is not a tiny point-and-shoot camera. It's an advanced SLR with an extremely high-quality optical viewfinder. So use it. But for those rare occasions when it does make sense to use Live View, you can turn it on by pressing the Live View button. And it's ready to go. To take a picture, you just press the shutter button. Another disadvantage with using Live View, besides making the camera hard to handle, is that autofocus isn't as fast or as accurate. And that delay, as the camera tries to focus, will really slow you down in some shooting situations, and could result in missed shots. Even Nikon warns in the owner's manual that there are about a dozen different situations where autofocus simply won't work very well during live view. Although you can change the focusing mode for live view by going to menu number A7 and choosing a different mode, it doesn't help. In my experience with the D90, even the new face detection mode is completely unreliable. My advice, if you must use live view at all, is to leave this setting on wide area and hope for the best. But don't take my word for it. Try the different settings and see what you think works best for you. The Nikon D90's D-Movie mode is without a doubt the camera's most unique feature. Compared to tiny point-and-shoot cameras and cell phones that shoot video, the D90 delivers improved picture quality and dozens of lens options to stretch your creative wings. One thing I really appreciate about video from the D90 is that there are no tapes to transfer. And unlike the current crop of tapeless video camcorders, the video files that the D90 records are not an incompatible format. They're just regular AVI files, almost the video equivalent of JPEG files. The video clips are easy to watch using Windows Media Player, Apple QuickTime, and most of the popular video editing programs. Whenever you're in live view mode, you can press the OK button to begin recording a movie. And then press it again to stop recording. How's that for being easy? A mic on the front of the camera records sound, while a speaker on the side of the body handles playback. Let's go to the shooting menu page and choose Movie Settings. 3 movie formats are available. The highest resolution being HD at 1280 by 720 pixels. The 640 by 424 mode is roughly equivalent to a regular standard definition television picture. And the 320 by 216 mode records smaller movies that you could post on a web page. The maximum continuous recording time is 5 minutes with the HD setting or 20 minutes with the other 2. Your choice of which movie mode is best for you will be determined by several factors. How will your movie be shown? Do you have an HD television that is capable of showing the HD movies that you shoot? Will you be editing your movies? If so, what resolution can your editing software handle? And so forth. Only you can answer these questions for you, and I strongly suggest that you do some experimenting right now before you shoot a bunch of movies with settings that were the wrong choice. In professional video production, that's called testing your workflow. Now, while the movie mode does make capturing short video clips fun and easy to do, it's not meant to replace a good camcorder, so don't expect too much from it. Here are some limitations of movie shooting that you should be aware of. Number 1, once the movie is started recording, there's no autofocusing. Only manual focus adjustments are possible, and that's very hard to see on the LCD monitor. Number 2, in the default mode, exposure will fluctuate constantly, as seen in this example, whenever the camera or subject moves. Number 3, the camera will tend to overexpose most movies, and it's very difficult to judge whether the exposure is right or wrong just by looking at the monitor. Number 4, with most lenses, you have no real control over the selected aperture or shutter speed that the camera will use. Number 5, audio is recorded as single-channel mono only. There's no windscreen for the built-in microphone, and there's no jack to connect an external microphone. And number 6, video is always recorded at 24 frames per second, rather than the more traditional 30 frames per second you're used to seeing on TV. So any motion in the picture might look a little jumpy to you. Here are a few tips to get you started off on the right foot shooting movies and overcome some of the challenges I just mentioned. Number 1, whenever possible, switch the camera and lens over to the manual focusing mode. Use the optical viewfinder to focus on your subject because it's a lot easier to see what you're focusing on. Then, turn on live view and then start recording the movie. Number 2, when live view is turned on, you can use the playback zoom in and thumbnail buttons to electronically magnify the image on the screen to help with focusing. And then when you press the OK button to start recording, the image automatically switches back to the normal view. Number 3, try to avoid shooting subjects moving straight at you or straight away from you, because focus will be less of an issue. Number 4, if the exposure doesn't look right to you on the monitor, hold down the exposure compensation button and rotate the main command dial to make it lighter or darker. This is really the only influence you have over the exposure, no matter which of the 11 shooting modes you've chosen. I usually set my exposure compensation to -0.7. Number 5, to avoid the problem of having the exposure fluctuate while your movie is recording, like this, go to Custom Setting menu number F4 and change this setting to AE Lock Hold. You may remember that we already chose this setting during the exposure chapter. Now, when you're back in live view mode and you've got the exposure set just the way you want it, you can lock in the exposure to prevent it from fluctuating by pressing the exposure lock button just before you start recording the movie. This icon down here reminds you that the exposure is locked and won't fluctuate like it normally would. So those are just a few easy-to-follow tips to make your movie shooting more successful if you want to try and get high-quality results. But don't forget, you can always ignore all my tips and just press the record button and start shooting. Over the course of this DVD, we've taken an in-depth look at the most important features of the D90. But this video is not intended to cover everything that the camera can do. The D90 is a state-of-the-art, highly complex photographic tool with hundreds of available options, and it would take a whole book to cover them all. So for a comprehensive guide to every feature and function, I recommend you pick up a copy of the Magic Lantern Guide's Nikon D90 book. It thoroughly covers every single aspect of operating the D90. At the end of a workshop like this, people often want to know what the bottom line is. What specific settings do I recommend? Well, that's almost impossible to answer because I'm constantly changing the settings while I shoot. However, here's what I would say are my typical settings for routine outdoor shooting with the D90. Aperture priority and shutter priority are my preferred shooting modes because I'm comfortable choosing my own camera settings. Personally, I never use any of the point and shoot modes, but they can be okay to use if you're new to SLR photography. My release mode is always set to single frame advance, even if I'm shooting sports or action. My focus mode is usually set on continuous and single point selection. I always choose the active autofocus point manually that works best for my composition. I use 3D color matrix metering most of the time. I always set a manual preset white balance for the most accurate and consistent color reproduction. My quality settings are always set for JPEG fine and the large file size. My ISO is usually at 200 unless conditions are too dark to allow it. And finally, I usually keep the picture control setting on standard. Like I said, there's no perfect group of settings for all situations, and you might find that you